The Community Strategic Plan is the community's vision for the Central Coast for the next 10 years. It's called One Central Coast because this is the first plan for the whole of the Central Coast. We are one region, one council and one community. We live in a special place here on the coast, one in which we want all members of our community to feel valued and have access to a range of opportunities to participate in the richness of community life. And every one of us can play a part in bringing this community vision to life.
If people feel part of a community in some way, they'll give without probably even knowing they're doing it.
I wanted to restore this building and get it back to what it was. It was the jewel of the crown, and I wanted to get it back to that. Making a difference. I guess that's what we're really here for.
The smile on the faces when they see these engines and that bus coming around, they just love it.
If you're following what makes you happy and excited and interested, then you're definitely going to live a life that you will be thankful to have lived.
At the end of the day, we just had a good idea. We needed the support of many people to turn that great idea into a sustainable venture. My name's Tim Silverwood. I grew up on the Central Coast. It wasn't until I got a bit older and started travelling around the world I realised that what we had was so special because people don't always treat the environment as well as we do here on the Central Coast. Our programs have focused on going into schools and running events in communities. We also have a huge global online audience. One man cannot solve these big global problems. It's going to take a tribe of people coming together to solve them. It's a really amazing and rewarding journey in spreading this message around the world.
I've always been on the coast and I've loved the coast. About 6 years ago I bought the Chapman building. I got the opportunity, I saw that it was for sale and I stood back on the car park up there and a village central and I looked down and I could just feel this was the place to be. I could just see what the town was. There's always these little niches that are going back and forth and I guess it's an obsession for all of us because we saw what Wyong was like and it's getting it to a place where we're proud to say we're from Wyong. Like it's become a real proud place to be.
My name's Chris Wallace. Myself and my wife, we own Community Fire Education and the Fun Engine. We educate the community in a different way. We teach people what to do in case of fire. One of the biggest things is our education bus. What we do, we go out to different fates, festivals, wherever we can go. When we do the bus sometimes, we get 2,000 through that bus. I just enjoy communicating and getting out there and just educating in a different way.
I'm Meredith Gilmore. I've lived on the coast since 2000, originally from Sydney. Chose the coast because it's close to Sydney, but it's got that more laid back kind of thing that I like. I like living in regional areas. I started visual art in my 40s. It's just so different from what I ever thought that I'd ever do, and it is what led me into thinking it would be great to talk to people in the arts on the radio. So I started doing some shows, particularly a program called Coast Arts, which was a new show, and I reached out into the community because I'm an artist as well. And I just felt like there was a lot of scope on the radio to do interviews with artists and poets and writers, and that's been going now for over 7 years.
My name is Shauna O'Brien. I am from the Central Coast of New South Wales on Dark and Young land, and I'm a dancer. As an Indigenous dancer, we're very inspired by the environment and where we come from, all of the trees, the way that they curve around all of the rocks and the sea faces, the beautiful water, the fresh air, and that plays a huge part in the creative process. I was lucky enough to study at NASA Dance College, which was a super incredible experience, and the facilities, the studios are really beautiful, the staff are incredible, and I feel very privileged to have had that opportunity. Through volunteering, I was able to meet a bunch of really great other young people in the community that are really passionate about helping other people, and that's a way of taking something that I'm very passionate about and sharing that with other people. No matter where I go to work or if I have to spend a lot of time in Sydney, I always come back to the Central Coast because it feels like home and it helps rejuvenate me.
One of the things about the Central Coast I've noticed as well, which is people are so helpful to each other. They collaborate, they are interested in going to each other's exhibitions, not just to see what people are doing, but so that there are people there. And you've got to be competitive, but you don't have to always be competitive with each other.
If you're in a position to make a difference, I guess you're obliged to make that difference, really. Just happy to, give it all I could, and it became, a local icon and a bustling place to be.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome. I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands upon which we're meeting today and pay my respect to elders both past and present. Welcome to the 23rd of November 21 Central Coast Council Ordinary Meeting. I will actually now declare the meeting open. It's great to see people back inside the chamber, including our own team. I have to say I'm of the older brigade. I'm not one who readily adapts, shall we say, to all the time being at the end of a computer or a telephone. I also to apologise those that can see me. I seem to have a big sort of mess in the front of my head. Well, I had an argument with a steel screen security door last night and the door won. So unfortunately, I bear a couple of scars, but you can rest assured there's no permanent damage. Well, at least I don't think so. I just need to remind everybody that the meeting is being webcast, so there are a number of people participating in the meeting tonight, so I just remind you that as it's being webcast, you may be liable for any comments that may be deemed defamatory and so on that might be said by yourself. So we will not be responsible for any of the actions from that point onwards. Make sure your phones are off. It does tend to interfere with the electronics here. And very nicely, everybody is adhering to the COVID rules, but I would ask you to remain seated, those particularly in the gallery, and thank you for adhering to the COVID safe plan. I gather including wearing masks in the gallery. I'm not sure, is that absolutely required? Can I? They'd have to? Good, okay. I'll just now talk about some of the things that have been going on. The first thing is we've found out today that, bless their little cotton socks, Service New South Wales has informed all the residents that are on their database, I guess, in the Central Coast area that there are Central Coast elections taking place on the 4th of December. Can I assure you that they are not taking place on the 4th of December here? I'm sure I would have been told if there was any intention to do that. So it's just a slight mishap from Service New South Wales. The Minister, in fact, for those who are not aware, did issue an order that applies to the Council that there will not be any elections prior to the 8th of June next year. And of course, any election is probably going to be determined to some extent by the results from the Commissioner from the public inquiry. I have made a recommendation to the Minister that I believe that councillors could return September, October next year, around that time frame, which would allow 2 years prior to the following state local government elections, which are due to take place September 2024. That would give them 2 years. I think leaving it much later, and that makes it a bit of a nonsense for a council to be in for a very short period of time. We will be holding a referendum at that election, which will be asking the question, do you favour a reduction in the number of Central Coast councillors from 15 to 9? And this will result in 3 wards, with each ward electing 3 councillors. At council here, what's been happening? Well, I'm looking forward to getting back to in-person citizenship ceremonies. We have held 2 days of 5 sessions per day, so that's 10 sessions in total. And I think I've made something like somewhere between 300 and 400 new citizens for the Central Coast. So that it's great to be able to do that, and it's nice for them to receive it, but doing it electronically, I just don't feel it has the same meaning. So I've got to say, I'm really looking forward to being able to hold the next one, which will be held on the 6th of December at Mingara. We're out at the moment consulting with the community over our SRV application, which, to be clear, is about maintaining the current rate structure for a further 7 years on top of the 3 we have already, which makes a total of 10 years. That will make us consistent with the business plan that we put forward to the banks and forms part of our agreement and contract with the banks, for which we received $100 million just before Christmas last year. So I would encourage people in the community to have their say about maintaining the current service level and rates. There is an online survey now open on Council's website, which is Your Voice, Our Coast. And I'm continuing to host open sessions with the community and encourage anyone interested to please contact my office to register for a session. It has been really encouraging up till now to see members of the community really getting engaged. I have sort of somewhere between 4 and 6 people turn up, and we just sit around a table and we talk about the way forward. But during those, they've got a far better understanding of what the key issues are and what is needed to be done to ensure the council is in a financially sustainable position. We still have some open sessions that are not filled up yet, and I'll just give you those dates if anyone wants to attend. Monday the 29th of November, we have sessions at 2 p.m, 4 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. Tuesday the 30th of November, 4 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. and Thursday the 16th of December, 10 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. So I encourage people to come along to those. You will get a full understanding, and you will be asked to do a little homework during those sessions. It's always nice to be able to congratulate people for doing a good job, and we have had a couple of awards and recognitions that have taken place over the last month or so. And I have to say to the Environment and Planning Directorate, it is a big congratulations for taking out the overall category winners for the Excellence in Environmental Awards 2021 in the area of natural environment protection and enhancement. And this is based around the work that we've been doing to make sure that the little turn is looked after down there at the entrance and so on. We also were Division C winners for sustainable infrastructure for recreational infrastructure upgrades for the kayak launching facility at the Southern Tuggerah Lakes. So congratulations to the teams there. It's just great to see us being recognised amongst our peers. Meetings, I have continued to meet with local members of Parliament to discuss their key concerns and grant opportunities. And I remind people that the grant opportunities are about renewal monies, not about new projects. So we're talking in both the state and the Commonwealth have been good in looking to help us build our cash reserves by providing us assistance with renewal monies rather than creating more problems for us by building new assets which they then hand over to us with the ongoing costs of maintaining and those assets and the depreciation line. Last week I met with David Farmer, the CEO, the Urban Development Institute of Australia and Regional Development Australia, Central Coast, for a briefing on outcomes of the Developers Forum. I took part last week in the official opening of the new Kmart Tuggerah store, which employs 200 people. Now, I was going to say all local, but I do happen to know at the time, there are some people coming from other stores around the state just to help up. But it was great to see, and one of the things they mentioned at the opening was already they have 13 Indigenous people amongst their employment list. And they're making a huge thing about it. And the other thing that was really interesting, they started off the whole proceedings, which is quite different to the way government does it, I have to say. But it was great to see that they actually talked about safety as the very first thing they talked about. And the director who was there doing the opening with myself made it clear from his opening remark that he wished everybody was safe, he wanted them to continue to be safe and to go home at the end of the day in better condition than when they arrived. And I thought that's somebody actually getting the priorities right. So it was a little bit of learnings maybe in there. Yesterday morning, the CEO and myself met with representatives of the Central Coast Branch Surfrider Foundation Australia to discuss their thoughts and concerns over the Wombrel seawall. With that, I'll conclude the opening remarks and I will now move to open forum, and so I declare the open forum open. And we're holding this to allow members of the community to speak on any item that they wish to do so. Of course, the same rules apply to them that need to be careful of defamation and so on. And I do need to ask the staff if there's any conflicts in the matters that are going to be discussed. I don't believe there are. So with that, I'll just remind the speakers, and this applies to all speakers, that you will have 3 minutes to address the council. A timer will be shown on the screen, you can see it up there, and you'll hear a bell chime after the 3 minutes is over. So the first speaker, and the only speaker in the open forum, is Joy Cooper, to request that council apply for grants and arrange education regarding the cost lands. So can I invite Joy? Good to see you again. I think we saw you a couple of days ago or yesterday, I can't remember now. Is your microphone on? I'm not sure.
To you?
Yep, there we go. Yep.
I think everyone to you about the rate rise, and today I'm speaking and I touch on safety, which and also renewal monies. Administrator Hart, there are two things I'd like to mention this evening: maintenance and education. Being a regular bushwalker, I've walked many bush trails which are in urgent need of maintenance for safety and environmental reasons. Many of the bush steps which were installed in the 80s and 90s, and I'm told also some in the red scheme, need replacing as they were often made from treated pine. There are many other walking trails which don't have clear signage, or in fact no signage now at all. In the recent past, my husband was walking on a walking trail which had a steep descent where the steps had actually been removed, and he ended up planting his bum due to damage to the walkway and the installation of carpet. The poor walking trail conditions or modification of some of the walking trails is actually in fact a safety hazard, and that was clear to us with that. It's clear our coastal open space system is the emerald in our crown and a draw card for many tourists to the area, as well as being one of the main reasons people choose to live on the Central Coast. The extensive consultation of our community for the creation of the One Central Coast, a council document, clearly showed us that. This being the case, surely the focus needs to be on not only protecting COS, but also ensuring the access to COS is not causing harm to those that walk it, or even damage to the surrounding bushland. As our society emerges from COVID and the economy is in need of injections of funds, surely this is the perfect time to be sure to be applying for every possible state and federal grant for funding for the emerald jewel of the Central Coast, to repair and maintain our long-established walking trails, which are often centuries or even millennials old and have been followed in those footsteps. This brings me to the second part of my request, which is in two parts. In previous years, there have been many academic studies undertaken of the endangered ecological communities and threatened species and endangered flora and fauna of our region. Has the Central Coast Council considered undertaking any of these studies or approached any tertiary institutions requesting or offering them an opportunity to use these natural areas for mutual benefit? Also, what is the Central Coast Council doing to ensure there is education in our community, considering there has been an influx of new residents and there is a clear and obvious need to educate these residents of the importance of protecting our natural environment and educating them on the threats which our emerald jewel faces and the responsibility of residents to ensure these special and precious areas are cared for? Not much longer now. Currently, the Central Coast Council are wanting to ensure any grants on existing infrastructure. Well, our bushwalking walking paths are certainly that. They are also in need of work to ensure the surrounding bushland is protected and erosion isn't the cause of further environmental damage. Please, Administrator Hart, ensure grants are applied for to be certain our COS is maintained and walkways are repaired to at least their past standard, and that education is provided to residents so that they are aware of the significance of the valuable environmental land we have around our suburbs.
Thanks.
This could easily be done as part of the rate notice issued to owners and as posts on social media.
Thank you, Joy, and if you just move back to your seat. But thank you for putting a written submission in, because that makes it much easier for me to ask Mr. Cox to respond.
Through you, Mr. Administrator, thank you, Ms. Cooper. Yes, the Central Coast does have a magnificent and extensive network of walking trails and fire trails within our natural reserves, and yes, some of those do require a lot of maintenance and upgrades and improved signage as well. In terms of applying for grant funding, the staff are always looking out for new funding opportunities, and currently the staff are working on applying for the Places to Play funding opportunity, particularly with looking at an application that looks at upgrading and some maintenance work with our walking trails. This is one of the funding opportunities that actually we can apply for to apply for maintenance for the walking trails. However, with other funding bodies, some of their requirements are for the design and construction of new projects, which makes us automatically ineligible. And also too, some of the time they're asking for a financial co-contribution. So in terms of looking at opportunities to fund this maintenance program, we do look at our priorities, and we also look at the resources to deliver the projects, but we're actively always looking to look at new funding sources. We're also, with the review of the Central Coast Section 712 plan coming up for review next year, we'll be looking for some funding opportunities for walking trails and other recreational activities in that document as well. In terms of working with some of the academic institutions, again, we're always on the lookout for opportunities for further research on the Central Coast, and I suppose one of the most recent partnerships was with the Koala research program, but we're actively looking for new research programs. And in terms of environmental education, staff in the Environmental Management Unit are currently working and developing a natural reserve and biodiversity education strategy. This document will guide and prioritise the delivery of environmental education associated with the natural reserves and biodiversity more generally. And we're hoping to have this draft strategy and document completed towards the middle of next year.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. That actually brings us to the conclusion of the open forum. We only had the one speaker. So we'll now resume the ordinary council meeting, and we move into public forum there. And I do note that we have 4 community members registered to speak. Gary Chestnut, Andrew Smith, Joy Cooper and Glenys Ray. And what I will do is I'll ask you to come to speak when that item comes up, so you will speak just prior to the item and you can say your words. So we'll move into the agenda proper. So item 1.1 is disclosures of interest. I have no interest to declare. I don't believe any of the staff have. Looking around, nobody has any interest, so I will now resolve to adopt the resolution that is displayed on the screen. Item 1.2, confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. I have read the minutes and I believe there to be a true and correct record, so I will now resolve to adopt the resolution that is shown on the screen. Item 1.3, which is notice of intention to deal with matters in closed session. Once again, we do not have any matters to discuss in closed session, so therefore I will adopt the resolution that is shown on the screen. We move to item 2.1, which is the quarterly report for quarter 1 for the financial year of 21-22, and I'm going to ask the CEO, Mr. Farmer, to introduce that report.
Thank you, Administrator. This report performs 2 functions. One, it is a review of the budget, the first quarter of the year, and it makes adjustments. And typically, that's the longest run we have between the setting of a budget and an adjustment, because you set your budget in June and largely pitch it in May, and now here we are into November, and so there are substantial adjustments in there as we see further information change in there. The net result is a small deterioration in the projection from $7 million surplus to a $3.1 million surplus. However, I believe those adjustments are conservative, and as you'll see when we discuss item 3 in the report, I'm fairly confident that we will achieve a budgeted surplus that is greater than the $3.1 million. The other matter that's considered in the report is our performance against the operational plan, and as outlined in the attachment, we are largely on track with the exception of some items which have been adversely affected by the recent COVID lockdown. We have some confidence that we'll be able to claw some of those back as the COVID restrictions are lifted over the next few months. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Farmer. Look, I think it's a very good result for where we are, given it's the first quarter of a new year following a pretty disastrous year in the previous couple of years. So it's good to see that we're adhering largely to budget. As Mr Farmer pointed out, you will get inevitably variations, particularly when we've had lockdown for, pretty much all of that time. So of course we do lose some revenue from some of our assets. So yes, you will see those adjustments, but I equally am confident that you will see by the time we get to the year end that we will be looking a little better off. I certainly believe that the team inside are actually managing things pretty well, and they are staying very strictly to their budgets. So with that, I will resolve to adopt the quarterly report as per the resolution that is shown on the screen. Item 2.2 is the investment report for October 2021, and I'll ask the Director of Corporate Affairs and Chief Financial Officer, Ms Cowley, to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. I'll ask the team to bring up the slide, if possible. Thank you so much. So on the first slide of the presentation, you will see that Council's cash and investment portfolio for the month of for the month of October 2021 amounts to $532 million. If we go to the next slide, thank you. You would see that it brings up the unrestricted funds balance that we normally discuss, and that shows that unrestricted funds sitting in red for water fund and drainage fund, like has been the case for the past couple of months, and that amounts to $44.4 million. So Council's resolution proposes to allocate the unrestricted funds that you see for $21.2 million against that $44.4 million balance, which is the $36.5 million in the drainage fund negative and the $7.9 million in the water fund negative deficit balance to make the 44.4, and then the remaining 23.2 will come out of the internally restricted funds. And if we go to the last slide, that simply highlights the fact that Council's operations are providing a running yield for October of 0.92%, which is very favourable against the 3-year benchmark bank bill swap index of 0.64%. Thank you, Mr Administrator.
Thank you, Ms Cowley. Again, a good report. It's great to see that, in fact, the cash position has dramatically improved from this time last year. As Ms Cowley and I were here this time last year, things were pretty dire, and we were staring down the barrel of some massive cash deficiencies. It has improved dramatically. We're still not out of the woods yet. You can see that quite clearly. But I just would reiterate what Ms Cowley said, that recommendation number 3 is clearly authenticating the council using those internally restricted monies on a temporary basis to allow us to continue to trade. And we will continue to do that for as long as we have that negative working capital position in total. Hopefully not too far away, and I know the CEO is pretty keen to eliminate that. I believe we will be able to eliminate that position, and we'll start to look at have some positive positive position in the unrestricted cash position. But bear in mind, we do need to have working capital. So it's not a question of just getting it to zero. We need to build up what we call a buffer, or the working capital, to allow us to handle contingencies, something going big time wrong, East Coast low coming in, and so on and so forth. So we've still got a way to go, but it is looking pretty good. So with that, I will formally move those recommendations and resolve to adopt the resolutions as shown on the screen. We move to item 2.3, which is the monthly finance report, and I'm going to again ask the CEO, Mr Farmer, to explain what I think is some quite good news there,
Yes.
on my reading of it.
Yes, certainly. Flowing from the quarterly review, which has to a large extent stayed the same. What we're seeing is continued improved financial performance. The month of October was $4.8 million better than budget and continues the strong performance that we've seen over the first 4 months of the financial year. Importantly, in the year to date, we're approximately $26 million better off than at the same time as last year. And that's on a turnover around $200 million. So that's a substantial improvement. Just reiterate that, we're on a turnover around $200 million this year to date. We're $26 million better off than we were at the same point last year. And of that, approximately $7 million is from the special rate variation that we gained from IPART in May of this year. But $19 million of that, approximately $19 million of that, is from very strict savings programs that we've introduced within the organisation. Obviously, this is only for a third of the year, but very, very pleasing results in the year to date, and it continues with the program, the recovery program that was established, and where we said we would work towards a small surplus, and we are continuing absolutely on track for those targets. It should be noted that the water fund is making a loss and is currently having to be subsidised via the general rates. And as you're aware, there's an application before IPART to adjust the water and sewer charges, which will mean that those, if we're successful in that, that these aren't subsidised with the general rate, and an increased investment will be allowed to ensure increased reliability, environmental performance and quality of our water and sewer services. One issue that I should raise as an item of some concern is that our capital construction program is falling a little behind. One of the significant factors driving that has been the COVID lockdown, so restrictions on ability to deliver via third-party contractors and our staff in certain circumstances, and a lack of availability of some materials. We're very hopeful that we'll be able to pick that up during the year, and we've got an integrated capital monitoring committee within the organisation now, which we've instituted to ensure that we are able to closely as possible deliver our capital program.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Again, a really good report, and I certainly would like to publicly congratulate the whole organisation for the discipline they're showing in the financial management nowadays, which clearly wasn't apparent in the years prior. So it is really good to see those in place. It's relatively simple, but it's nice to see us actually delivering results now that we said we would do, and the plan so far is working. So with that, I will now just move to adopt the resolution for the monthly report that is shown on the screen. We now move to item 2.4, which is the maintenance of the Central Coast Airport. We have two speakers in the public there who wish to speak. So if I can first call on Gary Chestnut to come and speak, please. And thank you for your detailed submission.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. I assume from
just
that
keep this a little bit closer to the microphone if you can. Just
how's that, Mr. Hart?
Hearing. Thanks.
Mr. Hart, thank you for reading the submission. So rather than reading the submission out to you, as I understand you've actually read it, I'll sort of paraphrase it for the benefit of the community, if that's okay. Basically, I'm actually speaking on behalf of the Community Environmental Network, and what I've actually pointed out in this detailed submission that I presented to Mr. Hart is that there's some inconsistencies within the report that's been presented to Council. I should also emphasise that this Community Environmental Network fully supports sustainable development and fully supports the need for public safety. Secondly, from our meeting last Thursday, you expressed in no uncertain terms the need to check and double-check Council's expenditure, and I believe that by maintaining the current resolution of Council that you'll save costs. On page 24 of the Council business paper, the purpose of item 2.4 is to rescind Council Resolution 690 and 6 of 19 and 660 of 920. On page 25 of the Council report, it talks about the need to actually maintain what's called a runway east end safety area which was required to meet CASA standards. It also goes on to explain that there is, at the southern end of the runway, approximate height of 1 to 1.5 metres of woody shrubs. There's a series of figures in the council report, Figure 1 and Figure 2. In Figure 1, there's a runway strip, a distance of 50 metres by 30 metres plus 60 metres, which encloses the letter RESA, which I assume is the runway end safety area. If you adopt the recommendation, you'll end up mowing an area of 4,500 square metres, and that's justified on a CASA requirements. Figure 2 also states in the report is looking in a southwest direction. With respect, I believe that report is actually incorrectly labelled, because if you look at the tarmac of where the photograph and you look at the next photograph, which is actually northeast, the actually photograph is actually looking in a southeast direction rather than a southwest. If you then compare Figure 1 and Figure 2, you're actually looking away from the runway extension area and looking to an area to the southeast, and in that area you can only see the woody shrubs adjacent to the tree line. Although that's a minor error within the report, it highlights to me that the fact that there is inaccuracies in the report, and I think this report should have brought to your attention more detail from the CASA report or CASA requirements. And that is, attached to the submission I've given to you, are extracts of Chapter 7 of the CASA Manual on Standards within Australia. Chapter 7 is titled Design Standards for Licensed Aerodromes. Within that, it talks about for aircraft that are Code 3 and 4 to have an RESA area of 90 metres, which is what the report is recommending you to do. However, if you look at the CASA reports on various tables in 7.1, 7.2 and 7.3 under Chapter 7, it talks about that requirement is only for aircraft that are categorised as 3 or 4. But by looking at the website for the Central Coast Aerodrome, they only use Category 1 aircraft. And so therefore the requirement as specified in the council report is it's actually optional on whether you actually undertake mowing in those areas. It also goes on that actually if you look at Chapter 7.18.2, and that is the CASA requirements are actually different to the rest of the world, and that is the runway area extension area can be part of the runway. It doesn't have to be a grassed area. And then I've included a series of photographs in the attachment, which is Photo A, Photo B and Photo C, and that clearly indicates there's an opportunity, particularly if you look at Photograph C, is the southern runway, or the entry and exit, is actually 142 metres north of the entryway to that runway. So the opportunity exists that you could actually remark the runway, and by remarking the runway, you can still meet all CASA requirements of aircraft to take off and land, and you also save the cost of council of ongoing expenditure. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and as I said, I found it very helpful, your submission and just being able to read it through, and I can see and understand your logic. We'll move on, and now, Mr. Andrew Smith, if you'd like to come and take your seat. And again, thank you for putting in a written submission. It makes it so much easier for us to sort of look at and think about things.
I'm very happy to. So thank you, Mr. Administrator, Council staff, ladies and gentlemen watching in person or remotely. My name's Andrew Smith. I'm the President of the Central Coast Aero Club and the Chief Executive Officer of the subsidiary flying school, Warnervale Air. In order to give some context to my comments here, I've been working as a professional pilot out of Warnervale Airport for around 19 years now and have some 11,500 hours or so experience on light aircraft training and charter operations. The recommendation, as put forth by Council staff in item 2.4, is, in my view, eminently sensible. In fact, it could be seen that persisting with the current status quo is irrational, and it exposes Council to potential serious damages in the event of an accident, which could be attributed to the bizarre situation we have in place at the southern end of the airfield. The area of land impacted by Resolution 660/19 is minuscule in the grand scheme of the ecological footprint and well-being of the Porters Creek wetlands, yet has fundamental safety implications for the users of the runway at Warnervale. I am unaware of any airport where the possible future well-being of the shrubs and trees which do not yet exist trumps the safety of hundreds of pilots and students who use an existing airfield 7 days a week. Mr. Administrator, the amount of land we're talking about here would be fractions of a percentage point of the entire Porters Creek wetlands. And quite honestly, it's land which, from at least 1973, has been kept routinely trimmed for the safety of pilots. I did supply some images. I don't know if you're able to bring them up at all. There we go. As the images show, the subject piece of land has been sensibly trimmed since the early 70s. Those images are from 1973, when just after the airfield was first put in place. Whilst I'm not an ecologist, I would argue that the vast and important wetlands, which we all agree is important, have been none the worse for wear for this very small piece of safety management off the end of the runway. The trimming remained in place until July 2019. The subject resolution was put in place a couple of years ago at around the same time that some previous councillors, who it's fair to say were somewhat ambivalent as to the future of the airfield, threw up numerous roadblocks with respect to trimming the northern tree line. The tree trimming was incredibly important, and I and many other subject matter experts spoke strongly at council meetings in support for sensible management of this tree line. So important was the issue, in fact, that the expert reviewers of the War Act review, their inquiry, went outside the scope of the review to specifically draw attention to the extremely dangerous situation which had been allowed to develop at the airport. Mr. Administrator, you may recall that one of the first decisions your immediate predecessor, Mr. Person, did was to approve the trimming of those trees. The safety issues which were recently resolved to the north of the runway are now being mirrored to the south, unfortunately. As vegetation is allowed to grow unchecked on the southern border of the airport, the runway threshold will need to be pushed further and further to the north, eroding both the runway usable length and safety margins over those tree lines to the north. The expense Council went to in protecting the lives of pilots by trimming the northern tree line will have been for nothing. Frankly, this is a farcical situation which should never have been allowed to be put in place originally, and here today, staff have pointed out numerous reasons why this situation should be rectified. Mr. Administrator, I urge you to move to accept the staff recommendation as presented in item 2.4 so that the users of Warrnambool Airport can continue to use the full length of runway available to them without incurring increased risks, and the ratepayers of the Central Coast can be sure that they are not exposed to funding any prohibitive legal costs should the unthinkable happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I also have some comments about the runway and safety area, if you'd like me to talk about those in relation to the speech by Mr. Chestnut, but I'm happy to leave that if you like.
I did give Mr. Chestnut, I have been giving the speakers a little bit of extra time, so you can have 1 minute. Okay,
all right, thank you. Mr. Chestnut is correct in saying that a runway end safety area is only absolutely mandatory at licensed airfields generally for larger jet aircraft. However, unfortunately, there was a terrible accident at Summersby Airfield in 2019. There was a fatality there, which was terrible. The ATSB, the Australian Transport Station Safety Bureau, did their investigation. They found that one of the major contributing forces to that fatality was that there was no RESA at the end of Summersby Airfield. Now, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority are putting in place a raft of legislative changes from the 2nd of December, and I would know because I'm having to write 200 pages of new documents for our operation for that change. The ATSB has recommended that CASA include a mandatory requirement for a RESA at the end of all unlicensed ALA aerodromes such as Warrnambool from the 2nd of December. I have that report as well.
Yep, I'll have to ask you to wrap up with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will now ask Ms. Cowley to just do a little bit of an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. I will provide a couple of slides and also make a couple of comments to Mr. Chestnut's and Mr. Smith's commentary. In terms of the report purpose, Council is proposing to rescind the Council resolutions which resolve to prevent maintenance of the southern end of the Central Coast Airport within 100 metres of the lot containing the Porters Creek wetlands. The protection of the wetlands is currently regulated under the State Environment Planning Policy, which is the Coastal Management 2018, and it presents a duplication of registration as it's of legislation as it currently stands, and the airport's southern end is currently overgrown. So if we go to the next slide, it shows the proposal of the yellow area, which actually also there are a couple of inconsistencies in Mr. Chestnut's comments. Firstly, on page 2, he refers to 4,500 square metres, and then further on page 6 of his documentation, he refers to 4,500 metres. In addition to that, so we obviously will be having to be talking about square metres as opposed to metres, but clearly when you look at this table, you could see that Mr. Chestnut has presumed that what council is intending to do is calculate the 4,500 square metres by calculating the 50 metres on the southern side times the 90 metres, which is the 60 plus 30. That shows that there is a lack of understanding of what council is proposing to be doing, because that's not really what we are calculating. If we go on to the next slide, in Mr. Chestnut's commentary, there was a reference that he couldn't observe woody shrubs that were 1.5 metres tall. Yesterday, the administrator and I visited the airport, and you could see the vegetation there, and if we go on to, and it shows it a little bit in conjunction with the car so that you can see the height of it, and if we go to the next slide, it actually is 1.8 metres tall. Planes don't have reverse gear. They have to turn around, and as Mr. Smith mentioned, there was a fatality here on the Central Coast, which created that recommendation by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau that while Mr. Chestnut is correct in saying that there is no requirement to have the runway end safety area, which is the RISA, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau made a recommendation that all aircraft landing areas need to have a runway end safety area as a result of this fatality that happened on the Central Coast. So Council is being proactive in its management of health and safety. And it is important to note that our airport is being used by emergency aircraft, and they can't turn around because their fuselage is going to ride along that line, and it could potentially damage it. So not only could they be damaged by the fact that there could be kangaroos, wallabies, foxes and rabbits that might actually create a health and safety risk, we also risk the fact that that aircraft cannot even turn around. Our focus here is about maintaining the airport, not clearing it, and that is at the core of our recommendation. So if we go to the next slide and the slide after that, predominantly what Council is intending to do is the risk mitigation. We are mitigating specifically the health and safety of aircraft operators and passengers and trainers. We're wanting to ensure that there is animal welfare as well, and the way that we are proposing to manage that by getting registered surveyors to stake and identify the buffer area properly so that it can be shown that that the SIP and the wetland are not going to be, that there is no opportunity for the SIP to be impacted. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Ms. Cowley. Can I just ask a question? How is it actually going to be marked out? Is it going to be visible? Or?
Yes, it's going to be visible with tall stakes that are going to stand up well above this vegetation, so it could be easily seen.
And they would be put in by registered surveyors, so they will be accurate.
That's correct, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you for that. Yes, as Ms. Cowley said, took the opportunity to go out yesterday to have a good look around, I guess. I think going back in time, I understand it was called a aircraft landing area, and now it is an airport. So I think there is something in the fact that it is now an airport. One of the other things that I asked questions about when I was there, because it looked like it and it was confirmed to me, that in actual fact the extension of the runway, of the tarmac if you like, which is actually compacted dirt, I guess, but it's been designed so that an aircraft can roll and can go into that area relatively safely if it's been mown and if it's cut short. So without bogging in or, I guess, doing a head over heels for want of a better word. So if you like, it's certainly not virgin native bush or wetland. It is in fact been disturbed and been redone in the past. So I think we do need to extend and mow to the sides of that quite clearly to make it legal. And I guess that as the administrator, and hearing that there's been previous accidents not there, and like all things, blame does come down to people who've made decisions in the past, and it gets tracked down as to who was accountable. I certainly don't think that I could be put in a position where safety has been raised by aviation experts, decisions by the regulators, and the fact that it has been determined now that it is an airport. So I don't think I can ignore the safety component of it. There's just another small point, and I don't wish in any means to diminish what Mr. Chestnut has said, but I cast my mind back to having listened to some of the tapes or viewed on YouTube some of the previous council meetings, not in recent times, but earlier on when we were keen to look back and see how things had gone. I'm just mindful that a lot of the dysfunction of the previous council came about because decisions were being revisited after they'd been made. And I think we have to move into an environment where we have proper information put forward, there is proper debate, a decision is made, and we move on. Because I think if there'd been less time sort of revisiting all these decisions, then there may be the eye might have been kept on the ball, and council may not have got into the situation that it did. So I just make that comment, but not in particular reference to any particular individual, just simply that it is an example of the sort of thing that was going on previously and was causing issues. So I guess with that, I certainly don't believe I'm in a position to do anything other than follow the safety recommendations and support the recommendations that are there, and therefore I will move to adopt the resolutions that are shown on the screen. We'll then move on to item 2.5, Council's Land Sales Program, and we do have a speaker there. Ms. Joy Cooper, would you like to come to the microphone again? Thank you.
Administrator Hart, I wish to speak in relation to item 2.5, Council's Land Sale Program Update.
If you could just speak or move the microphone a little closer to you. Thanks.
It's all about distance, isn't it? It was clear at the time of listing properties for sale that there was a lot of pushback in the community. Many residents were angry, and rightly so. We were told the properties needed to be sold. That being the case, with the report of the sales on this evening's agenda, I wish to note left off the table was the method of sale. For the properties that have been sold. Surely it would have been fair to ask that the method of sale be noted next to the properties which were sold. I'm sure you are aware, and I spoke clearly and strongly against any private treaty sales. I know I told the administrator at the time that all properties should be auctioned if they were to be sold. We're in a red-hot real estate market, much hotter than in the past 30 years, and I've seen it myself because I've actually been part of the real estate industry for more than 20 years with a real estate auctioneer and stock and station agent's licence. Which I note for clarity, they have now lapsed. However, I still take a keen interest in real estate and property and often assist newcomers to the property market to negotiate a deal. Surely for clarity and transparency, it's only reasonable that all methods of sale be shown on the Council's agenda. Surely the Council staff should be acting in the best interest of residents and ratepayers to obtain the highest possible price. If that's the case and the decision was made to sell by private treaty rather than auction, a comparison of sale types should be clearly available to the public so a comparison can be seen. Surely that would be smart and responsible. In closing, also, the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee was told on September the 14th, as of today, the 14th of September 2021, there are $47.9 million of properties under contract, made up of 3 properties, and they are expected to settle by November. Why have the $47 million worth of properties mentioned in the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee, which should be indicate that they should be settled, mentioned, and not on tonight's agenda?
Thank you, Joy. I think Ms Cowley can possibly answer one or two of your questions, and I'll make some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Council completely agrees with what Ms Cooper has mentioned. So Ms Cooper would be possibly happy to hear that 5 out of the 8 properties that are listed on the list were sold by auction. 1 property was sold via an expression of interest, and there were 2 direct sales, both agreed via a council resolution to council. In regards to the sales that occurred in November, I'm sure Ms Cooper will be aware that today is the 23rd of November. The month of November hasn't finished, and therefore this report is only for settled sales. So if there are sales, and we do have sales that are happening at the end of the month, they won't be reported in this report because the settlement hasn't occurred, because the end of the month hasn't occurred. In terms of the sale price and the valuation, as reported in the report by property address and lot and DP, the valuation price has been beaten or been as per the valuation on all of the properties that were listed, and all of those properties were being sold as per the advice by the property panel that council has got. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Ms Cowley. The intention when we go to sell assets is to make sure we try and get the very best price. And I'm sure those of you who have sold your own property or an investment property or an industrial property, when you go and talk and have the discussion with the real estate agents that you've chosen, there is generally a discussion around what method do you want to look at. And there are a number of methods, of course. I mean, just to name a few, you can set a price and say, I want X for it. You can have an expression of interest and then refine it down from there. You can have an auction. You can have tenders, which can be both closed or open. There's a wide variety of mechanisms that are available to the consumer. We're no different. And what we must do is take the advice of the professionals there. We are not property developers, nor are we experts in the area of selling properties. So we take the advice from the experts as to the methodology with which we will use. What we have done is make sure that we get everything valued, and from a transparency point of view, in the reporting of, we are making clear what the valuation was and what the price was achieved. Now, it is common sense not to report sales until such time as the money is in the bank. The reason behind that is fairly clear. Anything could get out and any person may be able to renege on a deal. We want to make sure there's no excuses. As soon as we can collect a number together, because we're not going to be in the business of cluttering up council meetings with each individual sale being written up and put to council, so we're batching them up if you like, and they will come to council when we've got a batch ready to report. So there's still quite a number of sales that are not yet closed and the money is in the bank. So this is just the first tranche. There will be more coming out. I would hope that by the end of this financial year, we will have been able to put forward all the total sales that we have achieved over the period. I think that there may be one or two that are actually closing or being finished off at the end of this financial year. That's maybe some of the larger ones where it's, clearly there's tax benefits from people doing it in certain ways. So we need to work with that. But as soon as we are able to, we are reporting all these sales. But we're confident we will have a total of close to $60 million based on the current positioning. So this was just the first tranche. So with that, I'm going to adopt the resolution that is shown on the screen to adopt those sales. Item 2.6 is the outcomes of the complaints and feedback on the management policy consultation. Now, this is a relatively simple thing. We just put the policy out for consultation. This is changes to the complaints and feedback management policy. It's been out, it's been modified. There was very few comments to it. So it's now back in. We now propose to adopt that, and I note that the staff will be trained in the new changes. So with that, I'm just going to move that report and adopt the resolutions as shown on the screen. So we move to item 2.7, which is the draft Central Coast Destination Management Plan. And this is quite an exciting piece of work. And again, I'm going to ask Ms. Cowley to talk and introduce that. I believe you have a video to show, which I found quite entertaining.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Before we play the video, I wanted to just provide some context. Over the past year, Council has really started to define and differentiate the Central Coast tourism product and our marketing as a destination, focusing on the unique points of difference of the Central Coast itself, and one of which is the Central Coast natural environment. So with that, one of the many amazing videos that the team has put together is that of Ace Buchan, who is part of the bedrock of the championship tour, surfing championship tour here on the Central Coast for more than a decade. He has clinched a pair of championship tour victories during that time, one in France in 2008 and one in Tijupo in 2013, and both came at the expense of Kelly Slater in the final. He's a great ambassador of Council, and we believe that he highlights quite well the natural beauty of the Central Coast. Thank you.
one of the things I really love about the Central Coast is that there are these beautiful kind of swathes of land that have been declared national parks, and as a child I was lucky enough to start experiencing that with my parents. To now go and do that with my kids is really special. Being able to kind of walk through the bush and not see anyone else and just kind of listen to the sounds and, you know, sometimes just drop the surfboards and go exploring. I feel pretty lucky to have access to. For tens of thousands of years, people have inhabited this land and looked after it and cared for it, and we need to respect this beautiful playground that we've been lucky enough to call home. Something pretty special.
Thank you, and we agree. The Central Coast is something pretty special, and as a result, we have put together a destination management plan to establish a shared vision and shared goals for the Central Coast visitor economy. The report that we put to Council presents a record of the previous actions from the destination management plan from 2018 to 2021, and in that report, we provide clarity that we have successfully delivered over 85% of the actions from the previous 2018-2021 Destination Management Plan, including achieving a record-breaking $1 billion in tourism expenditure in 2019, surpassing the target to achieve also $921 million by 2021. Whilst this was interrupted over the past 2 years with COVID, as was everywhere else, as well as natural disasters and fires and floods. As at 30th of June 2021, the region is currently at $975 million in visitor expenditure. Coming out of COVID, we have updated the region's strategic priorities to the long-term financial management of the sector, which balances community needs and protects our environment. The Destination Management Plan guides tourism development and management in the region for the community, the operators, council and other government organisations. We have been liaising very closely with tourism industry and stakeholders such as Destination New South Wales, Destination Networks, the strategic partners such as the Darkinjung Aboriginal Land Council, National Parks and Wildlife Services, and also local tourism providers. Council is an enabler of tourism, and it facilitates the delivery of tourism marketing and management in the region through planning and coordinated actions in collaboration with the tourism industry, the tourism funding bodies and other regional stakeholders. Council also supports the Central Coast visitor economy year-round through economic development, events, town planning and visitor information services. If we go to the next slide, Council has engaged specialist tourism planning and economics consulting firm called Urban Enterprise to help prepare this destination management plan 2022 to 2025. Some of the activities that were included in the preparation of this plan were 8 one-to-one stakeholder engagements with key government agencies and key local operators, 4 industry workshops which were attended by over 30 industry members, online survey for community and business which received 650 responses, and workshops with internal council stakeholders from the large portfolio of council's functions as well as the executive leadership team. If we go to the next page, the themes that are handled by the Destination Management Plan are the following 6 as identified on the screen. We are focusing on the unique points of difference that the Central Coast delivers, specifically our environment and our people, our journey to eco-destination, and many of you might be aware of Council's certification and awards in this space. And then if we move to the next page, thank you, the strategic priorities are as provided on the screen, and we propose that to achieve the vision and the goals for the growth of tourism on the Central Coast, we are focusing on those strategic priorities of generating sustainable visitation, growing off-peak visitation, specifically growing the visitor yield, continuing to promote a cohesive and recognized brand, creating high amenity for residents and visitors, and empowering a unified, connected and supported tourism industry. The next slide, you would see our key projects. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll provide you a flavour of just a couple. So in terms of the coast to country touring itineraries, the link between the coastal areas of the Central Coast and the hinterland to be strengthened by the establishment of touring itineraries that encourage coastal visitors to travel inland to experience the hinterland, and that is what we are trying to deliver through those itineraries. We also focus on agritourism and trying to grow that. Agritourism represents a significant opportunity for the Central Coast hinterland. However, there are many businesses that are still in their infancies and others that are considering farm gate or retail as additions to their enterprise. We have on the next slide the key measures and next steps. The success of this 2022-2025 Destination Management Plan will be measured through macro performance targets, specifically to grow overnight visitation by 10%, increase the visitor expenditure by 15%, and increase hinterland visitation by 20%. It will also be measured on the project actions that have been achieved and anecdotally increase community pride and public perception of the Central Coast, and the value of the new private sector tourism investment and continued public sector investment in the region. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Ms. Carley. Yes, this plan is due to go out on exhibition. It clearly seeks to help the industry come together, provide them encouragement, and allow them to develop. It's not going to be a case of council doing it. It's trying council to provide the platform and the ability to work together to actually achieve an increase in visitation and yield. Having been involved in tourism, I had Tourism Victoria as we developed the Love Every Piece of Victoria campaign. I know how hard it is to actually compete against well, in that case, other states and so on. Here we are competing against a range of other areas, and of course we have to deal with COVID and vaccination, and whether one's double vaccinated or not, and whether borders are open or not. So it's good to see some key metrics in there, which are targets to go for. So I'm encouraged by that. I think the fact that it's actually been thought through, it is a fantastic area. It has got amazing potential, and we already have a good base. So with that, the plan can go out on exhibition, and I really quite look forward to the contributions and comments that come back in, and I hope that the final document will be a good representation from the players out there and from the council and from the community about what we can achieve here. It's imperative that we do create jobs in the region. When you recall that 25 out of every 100 people that go to work every day actually leave the Central Coast. So since I'm one of the ones that comes up the other side of the motorway, I can assure you that travelling down from up north to the Central Coast or travelling up north from the Sydney area, the traffic is quite light. So it won't be a problem going that way. It's trying to keep and reduce the traffic that's going the other way by keeping some employment in our part of the world. So with that, I think it's a good piece of work. Look forward to the comments, and I'll move to adopt the resolutions that are shown on the screen. The next item is 2.8, which is rental concessions for commercial leases and licence, which have come about because of the COVID-19 regulations, well, requests from the state and federal government. Ms. Carley, do you want to say something to this or not? Probably not, doesn't need much. It is to provide rent relief in accordance with the National Cabinet's mandatory code of conduct. We've gone through it. We have to balance the whole time the fact that we are in a difficult financial position ourselves, but obviously we're conscious that we need to try and keep some of the businesses going. So we have, I guess, walked the line a little bit in there, and we do have to change our forecasted revenue streams because quite clearly we're not going to get quite the same revenue. However, at the moment, and given Mr. Farmer's report on how we're doing, the losses here are relatively immaterial compared to our current financial position. So I'm very happy to be able to pass the resolutions here to allow some of our businesses a little bit of help towards keeping going to when people can move freely and can go about freely. So with that, I'll move those recommendations that are shown on the screen. We'll move to item 2.9, which is a standard report we have to do for variations to development standards. And again, I'll ask Mr. Cox to just present that, and I believe he's also going to just try and explain again why we do some variations, so that hopefully members who are looking at this of the community who are watching us, they can just get an explanation why sometimes development standards are varied.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. As Mr. Administrator has said, each quarter councils are required to report to the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment the development applications that have been granted development consent that have involved a variation to a development standard. In terms of the variations made by this council for the period of July to September of 2021, there were 819 development applications that were determined, with 17 where a variation of a development standard was required. Now, this is less than 2% of the applications determined that required a variation. Of those development applications, 13 were determined by Central Coast staff and 4 were determined by the Central Coast Local Planning Panel. A copy of the variation to the Development Standard Register for the period is attached as an attachment to this report. As the Administrator said, slides 4 and 5, I'd like to just give an example of one application that was determined by the Local Planning Panel. And if we could just have the slide showing. So as you can see, it's an application for a house in Copacabana on a steeply sloping site. Now, the height requirements for that particular site are 8.5 metres. But given the slope of the site, to achieve an 8.5 metre height for the roof line of that particular house would require extensive excavation into the side of the hill, which probably definitely would cause more amenity problems and possibly greater impact to the site than had a variation been sought to the minor encroachment of the roof line to the 8.5 metre height restriction for the site. Now, this proposal sought a variation of up to 10.4 metres at various points along the ridge line of the roof. And the Local Planning Panel considered the request for the variation put forward to them, and they considered, given the characteristics of the site, that a variation to allow an encroachment above the 8.5 metres for the ridge line of the roof what was considered reasonable in this particular case. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. With that, nothing further to add. I would like to just resolve the resolutions that are shown on the screen. Item 2.10, which is the repeal of local infrastructure contribution plans. Again, yours, Mr. Cox, if you just want to, this is some very good news, and I think your team can take a lot of credit for this, so you might just want to introduce this.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Council has currently 54 local infrastructure contributions plans that apply to different catchments and different suburbs across the Central Coast. Since amalgamation, the staff have been reviewing a number of those local infrastructure plans with an aim to simplify the way contributions are collected, accounted for, and the infrastructure in those plans are delivered. The Central Coast Regional Section 712 plan was adopted by Council in April 2020. Council Works in Kind policy and guidelines was adopted in June 2021, and the Warnervale District Contribution Plan was modified and adopted by Council in October 2021. This is the next step in a part of the major reform and consolidation of the local infrastructure plans that Council currently have. And following this step, the next step will be to adopt a Central Coast Local Infrastructure Contribution Plan and also do further reviews of the Section 712 Contributions Plan. So staff undertook a review of the former Gosford City Council Local Infrastructure Contributions Plans, and it found that a number of those plans had been in force since the early 1990s, with no major amendments being undertaken since 2006. And the capital works identified in the relevant work schedules had either been completed, were no longer required, or the schedule for completion, or were identified in the schedule for completion in the 2021-2022 operational plan. The review found that 35 of these local infrastructure contributions plans were required to be repealed to allow for the preparation of the Central Coast Local Infrastructure Contributions Plan. Approximately $28 million is held in restricted funds in these local infrastructure contributions plans that are to be repealed. The funds are proposed to be redirected to the following. $23.6 million will be redirected to the Central Coast Regional Section 712 plan. This $23 million can be allocated towards current projects that are currently unfunded in this plan, but also too, staff will be looking at new projects that some of this $23 million could go towards to deliver for the community. $454,000 will be redirected to Contributions Plan number 31, the Peninsula, and $4.3 million will be redirected to the Gosford City Centre Section 712 plan. The repeal of the local infrastructure plans does not change the requirements for the payment of the developer contributions on development consents that have already been issued. And we've seen there are a number of development consents have been granted, but construction hasn't commenced on a lot of those sites. So for those particular sites, if they are commenced, we will still receive the contributions payments that are identified in their consents. Where payments are received under repeal plans, the funds will be transferred to Council's Regional Section 712 plan and to the Contributions Plan number 31, Peninsula, and also to the Gosford City Centre Section 712 plan. So that $28 million that has been identified to be redirected to the 712 plan could be a lot more, possibly in excess of $30 million. So in terms of the next steps, staff will be undertaking a review of the Section 712 plan to include local infrastructure projects where the repeal plans applied, predominantly in the former Gosford City Council area. The process will include consultation with the community to ensure the updated regional Section 712 plan provides community infrastructure that supports the growing Central Coast population. The review will commence in February 2022 and is due for completion in the 22-23 financial year. Council will continue to review and consolidate the remaining local infrastructure plans to create a Central Coast Local Infrastructure Contributions Plan. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Yes, look, it's extremely timely. In my time in councils in Australia, it's been a problem for most councils. And the problem is just very simple. You collect the money from the developers to go towards infrastructure. And the problem is there's either never enough to do the job, and there has to be general funds tipped in to support it, or the project, as Mr. Cox said, disappears, there's no longer any need for it. But the problem is the money is, as we know, is externally restricted and it cannot be used for any other purpose. So one of the things you will see, and this council is no exception, it has very large bank balances made up of externally restricted funds, of which a big chunk of are the developer contributions or the Section 11, Section 12 funds. So it makes absolute sense to narrow down the number of funds that we have available so that there is more money in each fund which can be used at the discretion of council for infrastructure, but in a wider base. So that makes absolute sense, and it will hopefully unlock some of the funds that get locked up in the externally restricted reserves. So it's a very good thing that's been done. I have to say, Mr. Cox, I look forward to some more work occurring in this area because it's certainly not finished yet. But with that, I agree with it obviously, and I will now resolve to adopt the resolutions that are displayed on the screen. We now move to item 211, which is the aquatic weed control on private and public land at Springfield Pond. And we have one public speaker, Ms. Glynis Ray. And again, thank you for your submission. It makes it a lot easier to hear and understand where you're coming from. We'll need you in front of the microphone, unfortunately, and I think there's only one working.
It helps to sit in the right chair. I apologise.
So thank you for that. Just keep close to the microphone and speak loudly and we'll be all good.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Hart, directors and observers. To put this issue in context, Springfield Wetland, we found out some years ago when it became badly infested with weeds, is only about half owned by council and the other half is in private ownership. Naturally, the residents would like to see all the water exposed again and not live with the constant threat of the nearly 4,000 square metres of bank-to-bank weed reinfesting the cleared half of the wetland that council owns. It's only held back, all this weed's only held back by a dividing boom. I wonder, are the photos?
Yep.
Thank you.
There you go.
By a dividing boom, and that is not an answer long term. I was looking through some photos only in the last few weeks, and I could actually see Salvinia managing to slip over the boom into the cleared area, and that's just a massive issue. So there's no argument that something needs to be done. What residents have asked me to convey to you tonight is their frustration that the landowner of the private half has not met what we understand to be his legal responsibilities, and many also view as his moral responsibility. It's great that state government, local government and the community have all been able to work together in such a positive way, and we're grateful that the state government is releasing the remaining funds to clear the other half. We do not understand though why this should involve any public money at all, nor why the landowner has not either been obliged to pay for the clearing of his property, or if that's not an option, hand the land over to council. If he doesn't have the means to manage it, put it all into council ownership where it can be managed long-term and properly managed. There's a great fear that all the hard work and resources that have been expended so far could literally be washed down the creek if there is no long-term plan of management and the community has not seen any evidence of the landowner's willingness to properly manage his land. These weeds are incredibly aggressive. Salvinia is one of the top, definitely in the top 5, and many people say it's the worst aquatic weed in the world. It needs ongoing management, long term, and Springfield wetland followers want to see the end of these aquatic weeds and for the entirety of the wetland to be made available again for the enjoyment of the wide variety of wildlife that rely on this wetland. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reid. I have to say it was a very good submission, and you did raise a couple of important points there, which you will note in a moment I'm actually going to try and encompass. It's certainly not a great situation when you have things that are on private/public land. From a public point of view, we can do one thing. And the photograph you show there of the boom, trying to hold it back, is, I agree with you, is worthless. But I suppose it was, at least it's held it for the moment. I mean, I have to thank the state government for allowing us to vary the agreement so that we can use the funds to go in there and spend the balance of the funds to actually clean up what is in the private domain. I think it is of concern, and I've certainly raised it with staff, that we are unable currently to charge for work that we do on private property. Now, I have since learned that we are able to do that, but we must list the charge in our fees and charges. I'm not inclined to think the purchase is a great option, because I am speculating here, but I'm guessing that... Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Whether we purchase or it's handed over to us, it would have to be, we couldn't compulsorily acquire or do anything like that. So it has to be by goodwill, or we must be able to set a charge or be able to recover a fee. So I have a mind to include in the resolutions tonight to ensure that staff have a look at putting in place, and if we move down to resolution number 4, I just want to add in here to be able to direct staff to investigate the appropriateness of levying a prescribed fee for this activity. So if we can ask for that to be brought to council, to add to number 4, that would be good. So if we can just put something in there. I can give you the words, it's useful. Yeah. So what that resolution is doing is asking the staff to go away and see if we can add a fee and charge to our fees and charges, which we have to exhibit it every year in part of the annual operational plan, and that will allow us to recover in this sort of thing in the future. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, and we've put them there. Hopefully from next year onwards, financial year onwards, we will be able to have that as part of our fees and charges. So with that, I will move all the resolutions that are shown on the screen and make those as a decision of council. Item 2.12, which is the annual report for 2021. Now, this normally, the annual report would include the financials. This year it does not, because the financials, the Office of Local Government and Audit New South Wales have requested that the financials audit be delayed to allow them more time to have a look at the financials from an audit point of view. And we're not expecting that to occur, I think, till just before Christmas, 17th of December. We should have that report. But the Office of Local Government is keen that we actually put the actual verbal report, if you like, out to the community now, And when we get the audited results, they will be attached to this to become the formal record for the financial year of 2021. So there's been quite a lot of good things done, and I think the report comments on a number of those things. And it's worthwhile, just capturing some of the fact that there were some very good things done by the previous council as part of that year. There were a large number of projects completed. There were major events held. There was a lot of drainage and roading infrastructure put in place. There was the Terrigal Boardwalk was effectively completed. So there were some really good projects that were done. And it was done against a background of difficult times, particularly with COVID, the pandemic, continuous outbreaks, lockdowns, and so on. So with that, I think it was a relatively balanced scorecard. There was, of course, towards the tail end of the year, the financial situation, which became a lot larger than most people had anticipated, and of course had a pretty negative impact for the balance of the financial year. So without dwelling on that, because it's been dwelt on in the past in great detail, it's just suffice to say is that there was that there, but from this financial year, as we commence from July 1 onwards, as you heard from the CEO tonight, after the first 4 months we are considerably well ahead of budget, and I would absolutely have to say I share the CEO's optimism that we will get very close to, if not achieve, the original budgeted surplus of about $7 million at the end of the year, given how we're travelling at the moment. So I'll set them all as a target now. But all in all, there was a lot of good things done, and I think we must record the fact that there were some good things done and there were some things that weren't quite so good, not all the making of the council, and we will leave it at that. So with those comments, I will resolve to adopt the resolutions that are shown on the screen, which is the annual report. Item 2.13 is the road reclassification and transfer review. Mr. Baldroff, you might want to just briefly explain to the community what that's about. It's a good thing.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. There are a couple of slides to go up. Just by way of context, Council has over 2,200 kilometres of road. The state has around 200 kilometres of road, and there's 50 kilometres of classified highway, which is the M1 that runs through our local government area. So local roads are essentially owned and maintained and also renewed by council. We've got regional roads that are owned by council, but there are, as part of the renewal, council can receive part funding for the renewal of regional roads, and state roads are fully the responsibility of the state government. The state government is looking at reviewing the classification, and it allows potential transfers back to the state government via independent panel process. So the slide in front of you is the proposal for local roads to be reclassified as regional roads. I won't go through each one of those, but there's 54 kilometres of proposed transfer. The bottom two are Huey Road and Rutleys Road, which will be a joint submission with us and Lake Macquarie City Council. If we can just go to the next slide. So in here, this is regional roads proposed to be transferred to the state. So that network is essentially five areas, and it's about 109 kilometres. Again, we're looking at making a joint submission with Lake Macquarie Council. The benefit of this particular proposal is that if we are successful, it would mean a reduction in our depreciation of approximately $3.8 million per annum, which would assist in financial recovery and those sorts of things. And I'll put the proposal to council for consideration. Thank you, Mr Administrator.
Thank you, Mr Bolgoff. Well, I'd have to ask a question. Is this reverse cost shifting?
First time I've seen it, Mr Administrator, but yes.
Thank you. I think we'll mark that down in history. So I think the important point there is by transferring some of the cost of these roads, if the state will accept it, then it does mean that it will cost us less because we're not providing for the depreciation or having to look after the roads in terms of maintenance, etc. anymore. So it is a very good thing. So let's cross our fingers and hope that the state is going to smile on us in a benevolent manner. With that, I will resolve to adopt the resolution to endorse that as shown on the screen. We now move to item 2.14, which is the Central Coast Roads Package Compulsory Land Acquisition for Ocean Beach Road and Rawson Road intersection upgrade at Oilway. Now that could prove to be controversial, but I hope not.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. Again, I have a number of slides to go through. Go to the next slide, please. There is, as part of the road package, the federal government has committed over $86 million through the urban congestion funds. There are 29 roads being proposed out of that grant package. We have actually completed 25 of those roads. One of the larger components is obviously the proposed upgrade at Ocean Beach Road and Rawson Road intersection, which is $33 million over 4 years. Just the existing configuration, if we can go to the next slide, please. It indicates it's a roundabout, it's a single lane roundabout, and it is causing congestion in this particular area of Oilway. The pedestrian connectivity is not the best in that area. This has been area of contention, and certainly it has been raised by the community, and it's also as a need for the area, and it's also in developer contribution plans that it is identified for growth. The proposed intersection, as shown on the screen there, is a signalised intersection. It's proposed to have 5 lanes, both sides of Ocean Beach Road, and 4 lanes in Rawson Road. We'd have dedicated right turn movements at all of the legs of the intersection. Obviously, safe pedestrian crossings on the 4 legs. There has been consultation with the property owners, and there's obviously a lot more consultation with the broader community being proposed for this major project. So essentially, in the slide on the screen, to the right-hand side, it's the eastern side, there is like a sliver of land which is part of the proposed acquisition. So that the orange component on the screen. The green is proposed to be a full acquisition and essentially a resale of that down the track. Obviously, there's the proposal is about improving the safety conditions, improving pedestrian safety, and the proposal that we're looking at has the best benefit cost ratio, and we've looked at least 5 proposals in detail. In the report, we've got identified each parcel of land and how much land is being proposed, and that's what's on the screen in front of you now, Mr Administrator. And I just want to talk about the benefits in the last slide, what is being proposed. It's fairly busy. I've mentioned some of the improvements, but I'll point out a particular, I suppose, improvement. If we do nothing, by 2026, the average delay at the intersection will be over 2 minutes, and the queue length would be a little bit over half a kilometre, so it's about 560 metres. By putting the proposal in as proposed, the delays will only be around, or under a minute, around 45 seconds. with a queue length of about 150 metres. And I'll put that to Council for consideration. Thank you, Mr Administrator.
Well, certainly it's quite a bit of infrastructure change there. Can I be assured that we are talking with the owners about a compulsory acquisition?
Yes, Mr Administrator. There's been a number of discussions as well as formal letters being sent to those properties that were identified on the screen. Obviously, the major property acquisition, there's been face-to-face discussions with that particular owner.
Thank you. All right, with that then I will resolve to adopt the resolutions that are displayed on the screen to get that underway. Item 2.15, which is the Grants Program 2021-2022, the Community Development Grants. This is, I guess, a package of grants that we have got. There's three groupings. This is one of the groupings, the Community Development Grants, and the proposal is to allocate $266,000 from the 21-22 grants budget to that program, as outlined in the report. And I think that's a good thing, and there's definitely going to be some happy beneficiaries. So with that, we'll just move on, and I'll resolve to adopt the resolutions shown on the screen. Item 2.16 is much the same, but this is in fact the Community Supports Grant Program for August and September 2021. And again, there's going to be some happy campers there, so we'll move on with that. A total of $27,759 to go there, and with that I'll resolve to adopt the resolution that's shown on the screen. The last couple of items are minutes from some of the committee meetings, and item 2.17 is minutes of the Social Inclusion Advisory Committee, and I might just ask Ms Vaughan just to make a comment on that.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. As can be seen, there's two recommendations. So one, we note the meeting records, but the second one follows a previous report that was submitted by the Status of Women Committee, which sought the support and approval from Council to develop a gender equity strategy. The Social Inclusion Committee at its most recent meeting also wanted to note, following a presentation from SOWAG, that they also, as an advisory committee, sought to seek in-principle support from Council to initiate and lead the creation and the implementation of a Central Coast Council gender equity strategy. As was discussed at the meeting and again within this report, whilst in the current environment, Council, due to its current workload and levels of resourcing, can't support the development of that strategy immediately. It has been noted that that shouldn't be seen as Council not supporting the importance of this, and that it is a strategy that should be considered in future. So whilst we're not able to implement it currently, it's certainly something that we would look at investigating further into the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms Vaughan. Yes, well, I'll certainly resolve to adopt the annual report for 2021, and I'll make that a decision of Council. Thank you. And the last item tonight is just the minutes of advisory group and committee meetings held in September and October. Now, a number of these meetings, of course, the minutes are not confirmed, so at this stage they'll be draft, but it includes the Status of Women Advisory Group meeting, the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee meetings, Coastal Open Space, the Cost Committee meetings, Catchments to Coast Advisory Committee meeting, Water Management Advisory Committee meeting, Heritage and Cultural Advisory Committee meeting, Protection of the Environmental Trust Management Committee meeting, and Extraordinary Water Management Advisory Committee meeting held as well. So those, the minutes and some case draft minutes are now recorded there, and I'll now resolve that Council notes the minutes of those meetings held in September and October. With that, at 8:18, we will now declare the meeting closed. Thank you for those coming along, and it's almost a celebration of being able to get back inside the chamber and have real people and on both sides of the table. So thank you for your attendance tonight.